Hey everybody, welcome back to Dave and Will's Guitar. So glad you could join us again. If you're a returning viewer, thanks for joining us, and if you're new to the channel, hey, thanks for tuning in. So let's get right into it. Today we're talking about the Silver Sky, one of the most popular guitars sold over the last, 3-4 years. There's so much information about this guitar, but what I'm trying to focus on today is some things that don't really get talked about regarding this guitar. And there's a lot, so hopefully this can shed some light on some other things that you may not have thought of, or some interesting features of this guitar that make it better or worse in your opinion. So yeah, let's dive right in, right? So point number one, I wanted to talk about the headstock. So as you know, on the Silver Sky, we've got a 3x3 headstock that has a tilt. So this is something you typically see, a 3x3 headstock, you think Gibson, and with the tilt, also Gibson, right? The nice thing about the Silver Sky, in comparison to other standard Strats, this headstock tilts back around 10, 11 degrees. That's what they say on the PRS website. And it's pretty good compared to some of the typical flat alternatives you see on like a Fender. Now, with a tilted headstock, yes, if you drop it, there is a more likelihood that it would break. But assuming you're not dropping it, which hopefully you aren't, you don't want to do that to your guitar. There's some cool features about this guitar. So particularly when we're talking about like tuning stability, this particular headstock is pretty neat. So one thing it does maintain that Gibson doesn't is the string pull through as it comes through the nut. So it's a 3x3, the strings are straight. This is typical on all PRSs, but the strings run straight, just like a standard Fender, straight through the nut. Mostly straight. They're slightly angled, but they're closer than say like a Gibson. Right through the nut. And what that means is you have better tuning stability. If you notice on the Gibson, they fan out, and that's not what you want. But on a Strat, you're going to get a lot of, Fenders have also straight string through. But that tilt back is really nice. And the reason I'm saying that is because on most Fenders, and I'm going to get a Fender here, this is a Fender made in Mexico Strat. And with this guitar, you'll notice, like most Fenders, it has a string tree right there. Now, is a string tree bad necessarily? No. Sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't, but most of the time it's fine. But without a string tree, you have one less point of friction, and that one less point of friction will add to your tuning stability. When you bend notes, or as you play your guitar, guitars tend to want to go out of tune. That is what they do. Assuming you don't have like a locking nut, right? Something you find on a guitar with a Floyd Rose. But those string trees, like I said, it's an extra point of friction, and it's also creates a stronger break angle than what's on that PRS, meaning as the string leaves the nut, it actually gets closer to the headstock, and it's a greater angle as it goes downward towards the peg. Now, on a PRS, like I said, it's at 11 degrees, right? So from nut to peg, there's an 11 degree like downward angle. But with this string tree, it's even greater. Now, even though this is flat, you can see that it kind of bends down and then is flat again. That greater angle creates a stronger downward pressure on the nut. And when you have more pressure, as that string moves back and forth when you're bending, using the trem, what have you, there's a greater chance for binding. And that's what we're trying to always avoid. We do not want the string to bind in the nut. That is how guitars go out of tune. So considering, that string tree and the angle, you'll have a better experience on a PRS because there's one less point of failure. So do all Fenders have string trees? No, they don't. And in fact, you can get staggered. These actually have staggered tuners, and I haven't removed the string tree, but if you get tuners that are lower, like these last three strings, the G, B, and E string are lower. These tuners sit a little lower than the E, A, and D string. You can have enough downward angle to maintain proper pull through that nut and not have any sympathetic noise, meaning the reason you have that downward angle at all is because you want the string to maintain the correct pressure to have the right pitch in the tuning, right? But you also don't want to have any noise behind the nut. You'll see like a lot of 80s players, they put like wraps around here to stop that. With a PRS guitar, it's less likely to do that because it has enough downward angle, but it also doesn't have a string tree, so greater tuning stability. conceptually. Is that absolutely true? Probably with a string tree. It's just one less point to rub. So I would say it's a safe bet that you're probably going to be getting better tuning stability out of that guitar. That's assuming the nut is cut correctly. Now, that's the next point. Because these two guitars are kind of in the same category, this is a made in Mexico Fender Strat. The nut on this guitar and the nut on that PRS were not cut fantastically. They needed extra work. So one thing you'll have to consider is when you buy these guitars, you'll have to do a little work. Especially on that PRS, there was a lot of binding in the nut on the G string. All the other strings were mostly okay, but that G string, man, I had to get in there and wear a little bit of a groove in there to kind of let that string flow more freely through the nut. So those are things to consider on both of these guitars, but it is an issue unless you're spending, you know, upwards of $3,000 to get like a perfectly cut nut on a guitar that you should expect when you're paying that much money. But on these cheaper guitars, that's something you might have to consider. The nice thing about the PRS, again, is that headstock, that angle, those string trees, less likely to have that problem. Doesn't mean you can't or won't. I had it, right? I had the problem and I had to fix it, but you're less likely. And this guitar also had that. I had to recut some of the nut slots on here just to widen them and make sure that the angle is correct to let that string flow through as best as it could. So, yeah. Moving on, the other parts of this guitar that I wanted to talk about. The trem, you know, as you're using these trems and as the strings move through those through the nuts on both those guitars, there are some issues here that we'll tackle a little bit later. But most prevalent is the 6-point trem versus a 2-point trem. PRS has a 2-point trem, which most people agree tends to work a little better, and we'll get into that later. And this one has a 6-point trem. But that is, as I'm talking in relation to the nut, is also something you consider because they all kind of work in tandem. So you're getting a better trem that'll work better with the nut, that will work better with the headstock break angle. So one thing that is never talked about, and this is something that I thought was really interesting, I had to do a ton of research, was how long the strings are and whether that increases its playability. So what am I talking about? Both these guitars are 25.5-inch scales. That means that from the nut to the bridge here is 25.5 inches. They're the same. So conceivably, the tension on both those strings to maintain pitch of a note, the tuning, right? The tension, all that has to be the same. And these both have the same strings. So the only thing that could affect it afterward as far as bending or fretting a note is the additional length of the string after the nut or after the bridge. Now, the bridges are the same, right? It's a typical tremolo bridge. So as the string comes through the bridge, it stops at the same point, much like a Fender. They're negligible as far as how different they are. But the difference that I found that I wanted to figure out is, does this length of string behind the nut matter when you're bending? Turns out it does, and whether or not that's actually measurable is up for debate. If you know anything about Benedetto pickups, Bob Benedetto makes jazz pickups and he's famous for it. He did a test, and what he found out was if you increase the length of the string and provide more string length behind it, the string should be easier to bend based on what's called longitudinal stiffness. So I'm not going to get into what that means. If you want to look it up, go look it up. But essentially, the more string there is behind the nut, the easier it should be conceivably to bend the string. Now, what you'll notice about the B and the E string on a PRS is it's actually shorter. Here, these two strings have less string length from behind the nut than what I would see on this Fender. If you notice this headstock, the last tuner there, the last two tuners are much longer. And in fact, it's about 3 inches longer. And that should make it easier to bend. That is not the case. So what they did talk about was when you have points of friction, be it the nut or a string tree, it makes it harder to bend because you have another point where the string is rubbing against a surface. So the string tree is one part, and then also the downward angle. So This is an 11 degree tilt back angle. So that means the string is passing through the nut and then curving at an 11 degree angle around through that nut to the peg. Now on that guitar, I couldn't measure the degree, but I did have enough, I had the right tools to measure that from the string tree to the nut, there's actually a greater pitch. It's a greater angle that it comes from the nut to that string tree, which means that even though there's more string, there's 2 points where the string is touching and moving that make it shorter. So even though, yes, those are 2 shorter points and technically the string is longer, because of that string tree and that break angle that's creates what's called downward pressure from the nut, it's harder to bend. So is that factually true? Would you even notice if you were playing it? Probably not. But I had to figure out that rabbit hole. It's something to consider. If you pick up a Silver Sky, and Dave, who's the other half of this channel, Dave and Will's Guitar, I had him play 4 different style Strats that you'll hear the tones for later in this video. And he said, yes, on the Silver Sky, he found it easier to bend. And after hearing that, I'm like, well, why is that? A lot of it is personal preference. Maybe you like a little more tension when you bend, and you might want a guitar that does that. But this guitar, theoretically, should have less stiffness in the string, and not less tension, but it should have less stiffness when you're bending, because there's less pressure on the nut, there's less string moving through that nut because of the angle, and the string tree, that part of the string tree that's creating more friction is really affecting your bending in perhaps a measurable way. So while I cannot say that definitively, I cannot scientifically tell you that that is the absolute truth, it seems to be correct. There's another guy, if you've ever watched other YouTube videos, he does jazz masters, I believe his name is Pushin. He did the same kind of test with the bridge of a jazz master, and if you know anything about jazz masters, the bridge sits very far back. Basically, he moved the stop tail piece, the tremolo piece, that is where the strings end. He moved it back and forward based on a modern style guitar and a vintage style guitar, and what he said was the longer strings gave it a better feeling when he was bending. He liked the longer length better. Now, even though you're getting the longer length on the Fender, because you have those string trees, because of the downward pressure, it makes it a little harder to bend. So it's interesting to hear those ideas, and I'm like fascinated by that. So I guess the next part of that would be go out and test it yourself and see what you think. So those are the foods for thought, folks. Something to consider. All right, moving on. All right, issue number 2 that I wanted to bring up is the bridge. So the thing I do like about PRSs and other guitars with a similar style bridge is that the bridge here, where the trem arm meets the bridge, there is a plastic collet. And I've talked about this in other videos, but where this trem enters, there's a little plastic ring that the arm fits into. And you're probably thinking, well, what does that matter? Well, what it means is there's a screw behind this that you can adjust to tighten or loosen the tension on this trem arm. And that means a screw presses into plastic, which compresses the plastic on the metal arm. Not all guitars are built that way. So if you have something like this guitar, you have this Fender Made in Mexico Strat, and I don't know if all Fenders are like this, but this one certainly is. This arm here on this guitar is a screw in. So you have to screw in this trem arm here. And what that does is lets you screw it all the way in or out, and it doesn't really have a good tension to it. So if you screw it all the way in, it'll be tense, but then you can't bend it up or down as you move this trem. Like moving it like this, which you do when you use it, it becomes a little more difficult. Now, what I've done with that guitar and what Fender recommends is they sell little springs that you can put in there. So when you screw it down, it touches the spring and the spring pushes up against that bottom of that trem arm and makes tension so it doesn't move or, jostle around. Some people don't mind if a trem arm just kind of freely floats and hangs around. I kind of like it to not flop around, but that's me. It's up to you. The other issue it provides is that you have a screwed piece of metal on the arm that's screwing into its little socket there. And what that means is that eventually you'll have to grease it. Now, you don't have to grease it, but if you want to maintain its longevity, you should put white lithium grease in there. Higher end bridges where they have two metal points connecting that rub against one another, they do recommend that you put lithium grease in there because that prevents it from, disforming that metal socket. So if you've ever screwed something in metal on metal, and if you put tension on it over time, it's going to wear out that slot. So when's this going to happen? I don't know. Probably many, many years of use, if ever, depending on how often you play that guitar. The nice thing about this guitar is I don't have to worry about that because it's metal touching plastic touching metal. It doesn't need to be greased, which is fantastic. It's another thing I just don't have to worry about. So it's something that I thought was interesting, that it just works a little bit better on this guitar, and especially for the longevity of the life of that guitar. The other thing, now we can talk about this blue plastic. So I'll show you a picture on screen that's a little bit better, but the grub screws. So there's these screws here, and you're probably gonna see them on screen here. They protrude from the 6 saddles, and that's because they're bent steel saddles. Now on those saddles, there's just a little lip where the screws come through, and they stick up through that hole. And particularly on this guitar, they are really long. And if you do any kind of like resting your hand on the bridge when you play, they're gonna shred your hand. If you move your hand at all on that bridge, it is not gonna feel good, and it will like, over time it'll wear into your hand, and it's not gonna be good. You're not gonna like the way it feels. I promise you won't like it. If you don't play with your hand rest on the bridge, you're gonna be fine. The other issue there specifically is if you do any kind of palm muting on a guitar for any reason, if you like to play any songs that require palm muting, especially I like to play a lot of 90s songs, and there's a lot of songs with palm muting in it, especially a lot of rock, you're not gonna want those grub screws or those particular saddles. Now that also came stock on the PRS. Now I will say that the screws were shorter and they didn't protrude as much, but I bought some block steel saddles, and you can get them from John Mann's website. John Mann is an aftermarket dealer who sells parts specifically for the Silver Sky, and unfortunately the Silver Sky has tolerances that are specific only to the Silver Sky. They're not interchangeable like most parts. So if you buy saddles from him, which are about $100, they will fit perfectly on this guitar, and the string spacing is perfect. So I know I said a lot. Basically, if you want to put block steel saddles on here that fit correctly, you got to buy it from that guy. Is it absolutely necessary? No. If you're not palm muting and you're not resting your hand on the bridge, you don't have to worry about it. But with this particular guitar, now there are these little holes here where the screw fits in, and they're flat. So if I rest my hand on that, I'm not going to hurt my hand at all. It's on a perfectly smooth surface. So that is one thing I prefer on this Strat, and over a lot of other guitars. I like block steel saddles. I'm a sucker for it. So if I have my choice, that's the preference I'll take. This guitar needed a lot of work, and I hate the bridge. Not because the bridge doesn't work, it's just because there's certain things I can't do what I would want to do with it because it's just not built that way. The other option, if you don't want to have the block steel saddles, is you can buy just shorter grub screws. So that's a much cheaper option. It's only a few dollars. And you can shorten them so they're closer to the saddle. They don't protrude from that saddle. And then it's still not going to be as comfortable to play, but it'll be much better. So something else to consider. The last thing about these trims, the PRS has a 2-point bridge. So there's a screw here, and there's a screw here. If I need to lift or raise or float this bridge, which this bridge is floated, you can see it kind of sticks up a little. So it sticks up about 1/8 of an inch, which is typical on almost all guitars with a floating bridge. You only have to adjust 2 screws, much easier. Now on this guitar, I can even show you this on this guitar. You can see those 6 screws above that blue tape. So each one of those has to be adjusted to the same height all the way across if you want to adjust that bridge. Is that hard to do? It's not hard, it's just more work. So if they are not in line, because all those screws have a little recess, like each screw has, okay, so every screw, there's a little slot that the bridge hooks into on each screw all the way across. So you have to make them all line the same level. It's just more work. And now Fender does sell two screw, or like a 2-point bridge. 2-point meaning 2 screws. This is a 6-point, this is a 2-point. Those 6-point bridges are on a lot of Fenders, and you can get them built that way. So that's specific to this guitar. It's not something across all Fenders. And Fenders also sell guitars with block saddles. So I'm comparing the ones I have in my home. And again, this guitar also came with the bent steel saddles, the same ones that were on the one behind me. So it's an upgrade. But for this guitar in particular, I do appreciate just the 2-point trim that it came with and the way that the trem arm fits in this bridge. Okay, number 3. So the other things I wanted to talk about, and this, even though it's this may not be quite as lesser known, but as comparing it to a Fender guitar, I just wanted to go over some bullet points for how the general overall build quality is for these guitars. Was this Silver Sky perfect? No, it actually, it had just as I mentioned in the last point, it had the saddle issues that I didn't care for, but there were some issues here that this guitar also suffered from. But I feel like even in spite of that, there's a better quality on a Silver Sky than a Fender, at least made in Mexico Strat. So I'm not speaking about all Fenders, just the one behind me, and maybe some of the cheaper models. But and I have a lot, so I have to have my phone here to talk. And I hate doing this, but one thing was the fret level. Most PRSs that I get have fairly level frets. They're not all level, and I'm talking about SE specifically. The higher quality ones are better. But with this guitar, I did have to level the frets. Now, were they completely out of spec and unplayable, and did I have dead frets? No. But I did have to raise the action to the highest recommended action height that PRS recommends for Silver Skies, and that was a little annoying. So after leveling the frets, I was able to bring it down a little bit lower, make it a little more comfortable to play. So that's something you might have to consider. One thing that really bothered me between these two guitars is that there's something called fret sprout. So at the edge of the fretboard, when you run your finger along the edge of the fretboard while you're playing, you do not want to feel any of the frets. You will potentially feel them, but you don't want them to be sharp. So there is oftentimes on an affordable guitar, you will feel like a sharp edge. Now you can take a file, they make files specifically for that, and you file it, and that's not a problem. However, on a Fender, at least the cheaper models, it's a little harder. Now, I'm hoping you can see this. I'm scooting up. You'll see where the fret indents in there. It looks like a little T shape. And that's because the tang, which is the bottom part of the fret that goes into the wood, is in there invisible. Now on a lot of PRSs, and I think it might be all of them, but it's on the Silver Sky, you do not see that fret tang. This just has the fret poking out. There's no little bottom piece that is exposed. What that means is if the fret starts to sprout, meaning if the wood changes because of heat or temperature, the fret's not going to stick out and poke you. Now on this guitar, that happened. I had to file the sides of the fret, like where the fret is on the edge, I had to file the sides of the fret and that tang that sticks into the wood. And doing that is very delicate because you're rubbing on wood and metal at the same time, and you don't want to overdo it, and you don't want to scratch the finish. Invariably, you're going to scratch a little bit of the wood. So to get it in a playing condition that feels good in the hand while you're running your hand up and down, it's a little harder. Now, was it extreme? Was it going to shred my hand? No, but I felt it and I didn't like it. On this guitar, I don't feel it, and I don't want to feel it, and it feels great. So that is something to consider if you pick up a Fender. And like I said, on the higher end Fenders, it's probably not a problem. I don't think they all build them the same, but that's something to consider. Another thing, this is a matte finish that has a gloss finish on the back of this neck. So if you do not like gloss finishes, which you can sand off or whatever, the Silver Sky, you just don't have to do that. It's been my experience that most people prefer matte finishes, and a matte finish means it's not glossy. So as you're moving your hand up and down the neck, it's not going to stick. And I really enjoy that feature of this guitar. It's another plus for me as far as this guitar and its playability goes. Moving on, the rounded heel joint. So the heel joint on a Silver Sky has more rounded edges. Now, it's still big and in the way, it's not recessed, but it's slightly more comfortable. Is it great? No, this could be much better. If it was like carved or angled or recessed here on the back of this neck joint, like if it had a curve cut into it, like a lot of Fireflies do that now, that makes it much easier to play. But I will say it is more rounded than that guitar, and less, it has a little less mass overall. Is that a deal breaker here? I don't know. They're so close, it might not matter, but I will say that this one is just slightly rounder. And I have like fairly large hands, so it's not a problem, but if I had smaller hands, I might find that to be a problem. So I'm not speaking from my personal experience, but just what someone else might prefer. Okay, the next point I want to tackle, guys. Number 4, we've got a difference in the way the tone pot and the volume pot sits on the Silver Sky and the Fender. So this has pros and cons on both sides. For tone sweeps, like if you're playing and you want to run your finger here on the volume knob to move it up and down to do like volume swells. I said sweeps, I actually meant swells. The Silver Sky has this like, it's not furled in a way where there's more grooves around it. This is actually a smoother feeling knob. And depending, like a lot of players when they play, they'll just use their pinky and they'll move it up and down on that Silver Sky. It's not as grippy. Now, does it work fine? Yes, it works fine. Is it a big deal? It is complete personal preference. If I was in the market for a Strat, I would touch both of those and decide which one I like more. Something to consider. But the more interesting part is the distance. And that's what I really wanted to talk about today. If you've seen a lot of guitars videos, they talk about certain things with these guitars that a lot of people run into is when they're playing, they'll accidentally hit this volume knob and turn down the volume as they're playing. So as I'm playing, like sometimes I'll just accidentally hit it. There's a video from Music Is Win, if you watch that channel, Dweezil Zappo's on there and he's playing and he's a phenomenal guitar player and he just accidentally hits the volume knob a few times and he turns the guitar off. And he even mentions in the video, he's like, this is why I don't play them. I don't like that. The nice thing about the Silver Sky is the distance between this volume knob and the string is actually farther apart than on a traditional Strat. And it makes sense. It's close enough where I can still get my pinky to it, but also far enough where I'm less likely to accidentally hit it. Now, for comparison's sake, I'll show you what that looks like. So let me set this one down. If you notice on this guitar, it goes pick up, screw, and then the volume knob. Like they're right next to each other. And if I had maybe smaller hands, maybe I'd like that. You know, maybe I'd want it to be closer because I'd want to be able to reach it. And I will say that if I have a choice, I prefer these furled knobs. They have more grooves around the edge, and so it feels more grippy. Like I barely touch it and I'm catching it. And maybe that's kind of what Dweezil Zappo is saying. If you like barely touch this, you're gonna move it. Where the Silver Sky, you have to be a little more diligent about actually touching it and moving it. And it's also farther away. So I prefer the distance on the Silver Sky, but I prefer the feeling of this Fender. So yeah, get out there if you're looking to buy one, test it out, see what you think. Something to consider. Okay guys, point number 5 that I want to talk about. Now, what you're probably thinking at this point, this guy loves PRS and he's just a total fanboy. No, now I'm going to give you reasons why you might want to avoid a Silver Sky. So one thing you got to get used to is this neck. It's a little thicker. It's still a C shape, but it is fatter. And the radius, the curve of the fretboard is 8.5 inch radius. So it is rounder than a typical Strat at 9.5. That's where you find most Strats. 9 to 12, and then the more older vintage style, and Fender still makes those kind of styles of guitar, they have a 7.5 or 7.25 radius. So this fretboard is round and the neck is thick. Now what that means is if you're doing lead work, if you're trying to rip a solo or whatever, it's gonna be a little harder, generally speaking. Some people don't have a problem with it, but people who play quickly or fast or like, you know, moving around the fretboard a lot, they prefer a flatter radius with a thinner neck. That is not this guitar. It is not what it is. You can get a Fender or an Ibanez or other guitars that are gonna be much better at that, generally speaking. So I'm not speaking for everyone. That just tends to be the attitude amongst guitarists. So something to consider if you were gonna do that, if you're more interested in lead work. So yes, something to think about. What were the other things I want to talk about? The pickups. These are like vintage voice 65s, and while they are a little hotter than a typical Strat and they sound different, it is a Strat. It does sound like a Strat, but it's different. So We'll get to tones a little bit later, but if you wanted a hotter pickup for like more distortion and stuff, you might think of a different one. However, I would say that these pickups retain clarity better than a lot of Strats. They just do, and we're gonna go over the tones with that specifically, but they are not very hot pickups. So if you wanted a darker tone, you could get something wound a little hotter and you might be a little happier with that. So this might not be the guitar for speed playing and for a darker sound there. So the other last thing I'd want to say, these are like things that I would heavily consider if I was buying just a Silver Sky and I had no previous experience with one or something to think about, was that bridge. So I don't like bent steel saddles, and I had to buy these aftermarket saddles. These saddles are so expensive because most of the time when you replace like block saddles like these have, if you're replacing those bent steel with the block ones, it's more expensive for this particular type, because you have to buy ones made for this guitar, which is really annoying. If you were buying one for like a Strat, and there's a bunch of different brands that make those kind of saddles for just a generalized Strat, much cheaper. We're talking like $20 versus $100. So it's another cost that you'd have to consider if you wanted to change those out. So those are some good reasons that I would say someone could tell me, and then they'd say like, the tone isn't where I want it, I don't like the saddles, or I don't like the radius. Those are all very valid reasons. And there's plenty of other reasons, but those in particular definitely make a lot of sense to me. So they might make sense to you guys if you're ever considering buying a Strat, specifically the Silver Sky. All right, guys, the last and final point here. So I kind of mentioned it earlier, and I said we're going to get to some tones later. One thing I heard and one thing I've noticed about the Silver Sky is it tends to retain its clarity as distortion and gain move up, like on a pedal or on an amp. So is that better? Well, maybe. There's no good answer here because we're talking about sound. It's what you really prefer. I will say that this guitar, to me, sounds like it maintains more clarity as you move gain up and fuzz. And we're gonna have some gain and fuzz demos between 4 Strat type guitars, and you can decide for yourself. Now, what I'm saying is, and what I've noticed is, as I turn the gain up, these tend to retain clarity. So what this might sound like at, like, say I have a pedal with a dial like 1 to 10. If I dial this up to 7, it sounds less distorted. It sounds distorted, but more clear than, say, that guitar that distorts maybe at 5, for example. And the same thing with fuzz. That isn't always a good thing. We're gonna do a shootout. From the tones I've heard, this was not my favorite in every example and every test we did. But I'll let you guys be the judge of what you think is better or worse. So we're going to shoot out a few guitars, and I'll tell you which ones we are. So we have this this PRS Silver Sky. We have a Fender Made in Mexico Strat. I have a kit guitar that I made from StewMac and replaced a bunch of parts, and that guitar has Fender vintage hot stacked pickups, so they're noiseless, and you can get a sample of that sound. And then the last one is a Firefly SSH Strat with Seymour Duncan's. The neck and the middle pickup are classic plus stacked pickups, and then the bridge is a JB model trembucker. So I've got a humbucker that would typically be in a Strat. I've got a Strat that sounds a little hotter, potentially. I don't know how you describe the Silver Sky, kind of mid-rangey maybe. I have a vintage hot Strat style pickup that is from Fender that is voiced as a hot pickup. So between those 4 guitars, you're going to hear a bunch of different tones. They are not all created equal. They are not all great for the same kind of music. So we just picked a riff and we picked some gain and whatever, and you can listen to those tones and see what you guys think. All right, we'll be back with those tones. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again. We're at the end of this video and we're just gonna get some of our thoughts as to what we thought about all the demos you heard. There was a lot of things we liked, things we didn't like, and it all depended on the tone, and because we had to keep it consistent. I mean, obviously normally if you're recording, you would EQ each guitar individually to what exactly you wanted, but for the purposes of this test, we kept all the settings the same. The only thing we adjusted was some of the levels, the volume levels for each guitar to make sure they were kind of around the same level within a few dBs. And that was it. So you heard the guitars as they were, just with the tones that we had. So for the distorted tones, we had like a John Mayer-esque amp and we added some distortion to it. And the other amp was a Marshall like TM45. I don't even know what model that is. It's just a Kemper profile that we picked and we added some fuzz to it. So really straightforward. And other than that, I mean, there was a lot of nuance to each guitar. So we'll let Dave, the professional musician, go ahead and take it away as far as what were your thoughts of all three guitars. And let's start with the distorted tones. What did you think of as far as distorted? Which guitars did you like the best?
I would say maybe in order. Well, at first I was thinking it was the Hungerford, the one that you made from the kit with the sub-modded out the parts or whatever, and then the Gilmore Strat, and then the Firefly, and then the Silver Sky last for me.
Silver Sky last for you.
But for me, I don't know. The more I hear them, it's really kind of a tie for me between the Gilmore Strat and the Hungerford. They both sound, I think, with that really good with that. I really like the way with the Strat there that the brakes sound just like a really nice, full, it just has this cool sound to it, But yeah, I feel like the Hungerford, those pickups, you have this.
They were the Fender Ultra Noiseless Generation 3 hot wound vintage stacks, which is what they call them. It's like a mouthful. So, and I'm not even getting that in the right order, but I know that if you look those up, that's what they are.
Yeah, I feel like with those and what we did later with the fuzz, it just has a very clear. It's very. The quality of the sound is very, very good and clear and almost noiseless to me. Really, that accentuates. I mean, you said these are noiseless in all of these except one, right? You said,
and that's the one you're holding.
This one, but especially with this Hungerford, something about those same pickups aren't. It's not. They're all different noiseless pickups, right? So something about the ones that are on this one to me, there's emphasis on that noiseless. It's just really clean. If I was in the recording for the studio or something, that's if I really wanted, just a high quality, clean sound that's you can just really hear everything really well. I don't know, just something about that guitar. Those pickups have that, I feel like.
Okay, so would you say for the distorted, so you said the Gilmore, even for the distorted, you would say this one was your number one?
With me, I thought it was this one at first, and then I hear that one. It's kind of torn between those two.
So those could be the top two.
Really,
so
really nice. But one thing I was saying, for the Silver Sky for me, I've only played it here through what we did with these. Because this is your guitar, not mine. Just from what I've noticed with it, it seems like the distortion is not. It doesn't sound as distorted. It's got a bluesier overall kind of tone to it. It kind of pulls back the distortion. And you can probably explain that more why that is. But to me, for these songs or pieces of ideas that we did, these riffs, whatever, for me, I didn't gravitate toward it as much. I mean, I guess it was a little clearer sometimes because of but it was almost weaker sounding to me a little bit. But if I was in the studio and wanting to kind of double guitars, and you can maybe have that one and pan them or something, and have that one kind of combined with one of these others to make the sound, because those have a little more. The distortion takes over a little more, whereas this one is a little more clear, so you can kind of blend them maybe. But for this and the fuzz one for me, the Silver Sky was kind of the bottom of the. I'm jumping ahead, I guess, talking about the fuzz part, but.
But so for that, so it would be one of these is 1 and 2, and then this would be your third. The Firefly with the Seymour Duncan pickups in it, and then the Silver Sky last. Yeah.
Yeah, the Firefly to me, for that, it's a little muddy. I don't know. It's a little mid-range, a little more mid-rangey, which is the humbucker thing. It's just something. These were a little more. These two were a little more crisp and clear and tight, and
that makes sense.
Almost like more response from the strings. It felt like almost when you were playing. I was playing,
I think I agree. I think I like this way the Silver Sky, and I think we can both agree that the Silver Sky was probably like the whole one of the purpose of this last part of the video was how does the Silver Sky respond to distortion and fuzz, but right now just distortion. I would say that was the most clear by far. By far it was the most clear. So what that means to me is, like, let's say you have an amp, you turn the distortion, and I think I said this earlier in the video, if you have let's say you turn the pedal or your amp or whatever, you turn it to 5 on the dial. 5 on the dial on that is going to sound less distorted than all these other guitars. So as you're turning up that distortion, and as you approach 10, which is going to be your max distortion or whatever you're doing, gain, what have you, that guitar is going to be the cleanest overall, and it's going to distort the slowest. So you're going to get like a broader range of what that distortion, and that could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but you might want more distortion. And obviously when you're cranking a pedal or an amp or cranking the gain, you want a lot of distortion. That might not be the guitar for you, if you're going to play like blues or things like that. So that makes sense.
If I was playing something that was more bluesy, I feel like bluesier tones or clean tones on this is great. Yeah, but for me, for some of this stuff, had a little more of the trying to get a little more of a rock sound or something.
I think for me, if I have to put them in order, I would say I liked the guitar, this Hungerford guitar that I made, and then I don't know. See, after that one, I really didn't think about it much because I'm like, I just like that one. That's the one I want to hear. The Gilmore is okay. I like the Gilmore pickups a lot. It didn't really do it for me. I would say this is 1, and then 2 and 3 would be between this Firefly and the Firefly and the Strat, and then maybe the Silver Sky last. But I also like the Silver Sky a lot, so it's like 1 and then the rest of them. So I don't know if I could really choose between the others. So it's tough.
And they all sound great. I think it's just like if compared to each other, I think.
Right. And obviously, like if we had gone through, taken an amp, taken the pedals, and dialed in perfectly for each guitar, we might like that guitar better with the same riff. I mean, if we dialed in each guitar for every sound for that one riff, it could have sounded totally different, but the idea was to compare them all with the same settings, which obviously is not going to work for every guitar. That's why you have all these dials and knobs on everything, because that's just how reality, that's what you're going to do. I think that showcases kind of what we were talking about. Is the Silver Sky more clear? Yes. Is it what you want? Well, not really what we wanted necessarily.
Not for these
riffs. Yeah. If we were playing like super clean tones, and maybe if we'd done that in this video, it would be a different story. But that's just kind of how it went. So, did you have anything regarding distortion that you wanted to talk about that you could think of, or should we just move on to fuzz?
No, I mean, but I mean, I was playing this earlier and just doing like a.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds great. Yeah. It just depends on what you're playing. If you're more.
Right.
It just depends. So that's the thing. I'm definitely not trying to.
Now that we're back,
the Silver Sky.
Right, we're back on the John Mayer tone, and we're like, oh, that sounds really good. So the John Mayer Kemper profile that comes stock with Kemper, you can get as a pack. Sounds great with the Silver Sky. Makes sense. His amp, his guitar, going to sound closer to what he plays in real life, and it sounds great. So, all right. So let's head over to fuzz. So for fuzz, it was a different story. At least I think for both of us, we had a different order. So what would you say for the fuzz tones that you liked better than one versus the other?
I think fuzz for me, overall, it was the Gilmore Strat. It was interesting because it kept sounding like, because for the fuzz, you were using a clean tone in the Kemper, right, and then using this pedal.
Yeah, we were using the super
whereas
fuzz,
the distortion, we were using distortion from the Kemper.
From the Kemper,
right? So to me, it just kept sounding, even though we had the blend like all the way up on this, it kept sounding like there was still like an A-B kind of sound where you had a clean tone and the fuzz. I don't know if maybe if you'll notice that or not. It's like you still hear the strings kind of and stuff like pretty clearly. But you know, I don't know. It just overall, I felt like that one. You know, I just felt the most comfortable playing it and the most comfortable listening back to with that setting. But I'd say the next for me would probably have been probably the Firefly actually, then Hungerford, and then the Silver,
and then the Silver Sky
again for me last.
Yeah, yeah, that's funny because I think I would prefer. Back for those distorted, or sorry, for the fuzz tones. Gosh, I think it would be the Hungerford. I have almost backwards. So, well, this would be number one, the Hungerford, and then the Made in Mexico Strat for number two with the Gilmore pickups, and then 3 would be the Firefly, and then the Silver Sky. Last again, man. We See that's it's funny. Again, and with the fuzz, it still retained its clarity. And so while we were mixing this is an aside, but while we were mixing this and we're playing around with the sounds, I had accidentally played 2 of them back together. So I played the Silver Sky with the Gilmore together, and it sounded great. Yeah. You know, when you have 2 guitars, you know, like if you're multi-tracking and you're layering your guitars, the Silver Sky was a great accompaniment because you have you still get the fuzz, but you maintain some of the clarity, and it's like a perfectly layered sound. Where I feel like if we had done like the Firefly and maybe the Hungerford, those would be really dirty. Like it would sound really like messy. So it has its place.
Yeah. I mean, and then also, you listen to John Mayer or whoever, plenty of people play Silver Sky and it sounds amazing. You know, so
right,
it's like,
of course.
It's just in this context, I guess, you know, or,
exactly.
Giving these examples, you know, so but.
Right. You know. Well, and that makes sense. I mean, obviously, every guitar has its own niche a role that it fills. It's arguing over the sound of a guitar is like arguing what your favorite tool in a toolbox is. It's like someone saying like, "Well, I love the wrench," and the other guy's like, "No, dude, have you ever seen the screwdriver?" Like, it's like they do different things. So, and guitars, I feel like kind of serve the same purpose. So, that's about all I got. Do you have any other opinions? Any burning desires to talk about?
Not really. It's just thinking back. It's just that you know, another musician who I have performed with sometimes, who's endorsed by PRS, and when the Silver Sky came out, I'm sure he has, like you said, this is like the cheaper.
That's the SE model, yeah.
So so I think he has like the higher
the
end
core model, yeah.
You know, but I mean, like him, for example, he was just like, it's a better Strat, basically. I mean, he was saying, you know, he was like, it's, you know, I mean, you hear him play it, just like, wow, you know. I mean, so it just depends on, you know, what you're playing and the, you know,
the tones,
all
and
kinds of factors, you know. So
right.
So I just, you know, hopefully won't get like, you know, not that we get enough views for it to be, but you know, some kind of message from Paul Reed Smith, like, you know, cease and desist.
Right.
You're saying,
Well, it's funny because like, this
doesn't work like that.
I'm sure. You know, he's not gonna be upset. I would say, I mean, when I'm playing just through a clean tone, like if I'm playing through the Princeton amp, I actually prefer the Silver Sky. Just clean tone, I think it sounds fantastic. It's like, it sounds really good, and that's kind of what I mess around with the most. The Firefly can sound a bit muddy, and when you did the distortion riff, we played on the humbucker, so that's going to be even more muddy. And that, I mean, the Hungerford's not my guitar, but I mean, I have it here, I can play it, but I just, because it's not necessarily mine, I don't pick it up. And like, this guitar is also not mine, it's my wife's. It sits upstairs.
Yeah, and this one's not yours because you made this one for me.
For you, yeah.
So it's mine, but I leave it here because we use it more here than I do.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I play the guitars that are technically mine, so which is the Firefly and the Silver Sky. So there's a balance. And I you know, we should probably talk about the feeling a little bit because we didn't do that. So let's get your opinion. Let's get the professional opinion first, and then you have the layperson's opinion. Which one out of the four, what would you order them as far as playability? Like, how do you like the feel of each guitar?
I would say probably for me a tie between these two, the Firefly and the Hungerford. Then maybe that one, and then maybe the Silver Sky.
The Silver Sky last
again. The neck on this feels kind of fat.
It is
to
fat.
me.
It is the fast neck.
Yeah. But another issue to me, I'm not as big of a fan of maple necks. Just something with lacquer, I guess,
yeah,
or
the
whatever.
lacquer,
It feels like it slows me down, or so. I don't know. I prefer like rosewood kind of, like,
Right.
So there is that, but it still feels, The only thing for me I noticed with that, well, I feel like last time I played it was before you kind of sanded down the
screws.
It's weird. After that, it's definitely better on your hand because it doesn't cut into you, but it feels so flat or something. I don't know if it's just the song I was playing on it. Something about it. I was not getting as comfortable with my right hand on it this time. But I think sometimes it's just, for me, anytime I play another guitar, because I have a Les Paul and SG, Gibson Les Paul and Gibson SG, but so I'm used to playing those. So anytime I come in here and we play all these other guitars, each time it kind of takes me having to get. Yeah, they're different enough, to get used to it some, but yeah, from what I think these two, there's something about that. I can't remember. You know more about this stuff than I do. These necks, like especially this one, it's just so smooth and nice and kind of more flat. For me, same thing with that even like the wood. I don't know, for some reason
feels better.
It's like again versus maple versus maybe I don't know. Just something about it is just real smooth and So, but the big thing with this one, is to me is the neck is it's fat, and then this almost feels like it's not as wide here.
Right.
I don't know.
It's rounder. It's definitely rounder. It's rounder and fatter out of all the guitars. So that has the roundest. The radius of the fretboard is the roundest, and then the neck is also the fattest and the roundest. So it's like everything you don't want in a guitar. All put into the Silver Sky. So
some people would love that, It's just me personally.
Right. It's just, and that is good.
Yeah.
That's personal preference for sure. I like that. I have bigger hands, so like when I play that guitar, it doesn't bother me, and I kind of like it, especially when I'm playing chords. It feels very comfortable. But it's not for everybody. You also talked about bending on that guitar felt pretty good though, right? You said the bending on just the...
Yeah, it feels pretty good. Yeah, I'd have to go back on each one and remember.
Which one.
Yeah, I feel like a couple of them, it really felt like I had something to stretch more than, for some reason. I'd have to I can't remember. I'd have to go back and play them. But
so I agree though. I think, these have thinner necks. This was the aftermarket neck, so we put a different neck on that guitar. That did not come with the StewMat kit. That was a $80 eBay neck from China. But that neck feels great. It feels really good.
Yeah. I remember the neck you had on before. It was like you would just press down on the string a little bit and it would slide off the end of the fretboard. I'd never played a guitar like that before. Just like I wasn't even like bending the string. It felt like it would just kind of like come off from like playing.
The neck that was on there was the roundest of all of them. It was a 7.25 radius, so it was super round, and then it was very thin. It was very narrow, so it was really round and narrow. So with like you're scrunching your hand up and you're pulling strings and they're slipping off. So that needed to change. But
this neck is great. I think I really. I remember as soon as you changed it, I was like, that's a lot better.
That's a lot better.
It feels great. I think for me it's just a little more flat, kind of, and So.
I mean, and that one's probably feels closer to a Gibson, like a 60s neck. So 60s Gibson neck will feel a little bit. They're definitely thin and like not super round, like whereas Fenders tend to have a little bit rounder necks, and depending on the year and the model, it'll be a little fatter. Of course, Gibson also makes fatter necks for older guitars. Anyway, it's besides the point. I would say playability wise, I think this is my least favorite. I don't like the frets. I don't like feeling the frets on the side because they have the fret tang. We talked about that earlier in the video that he hasn't seen, but I don't like the way it feels. I don't like the finish on the neck. I don't like the maple fretboard. I don't feel this guitar is fun to play at all. I would play any of the others. And actually the Silver Sky, because I have bigger hands, is fine. And these two guitars feel good. That one's almost too thin for me, but I think I like the Firefly neck the best.
Yeah, the Firefly feels really good too, I think. Both of those.
But overall, and then of course, in the beginning of this video, I had tape over here because I had not changed the grub screws, but it does feel better now. But again, like you said, it's flat. I don't know. I don't really like this bridge. I don't really like this guitar. Sounds great, but I don't like playing it. But so I think we hit all the highlights of these guitars. I don't know if there's much more to say. Maybe the next video we'll do humbucker guitars. We'll get all the humbucker guitars in here and throw them all together and see what sticks. But yeah, any other final thoughts? Anything you can think of? Here's a question: if you were in a store, would you which one would you pick to purchase if you just had to say like, okay, I only have one guitar? Which one would you think you'd want to like pick out of all of them? And then if you weren't gonna, none of them is an acceptable answer also, or would you just look for a brand new like I don't know, maybe a Fender, maybe just like a Fender out of the box?
So out of these four, if I had to,
if you had to pick one,
I'd say probably for me it'd be these two, the Firefly or the Hungerford. Yeah. I mean, I do like the humbucker on the bridge a lot of times. Although I didn't in this instance, plenty of other stuff. I feel like I do, it's tough, I mean, these three, this for me would be,
probably pass on that one. That's okay. It's fine.
But that's just because again, like I have more rock, modern rock kind of, sounds usually influences, and stuff like that. But
makes sense. Yeah. All right. Yep. Well, thanks everybody for joining us in this video. This video is going to be pretty long, so I hope you stuck with it. But we tried to give the best example of things that were not talked about with the Silver Sky and really kind of do some different testing that you don't normally hear. And I hope you guys like it, and let us know what you think. Your opinion matters to us because we want to make you better videos. So let us know. And hope to see you again in the next one. Thanks again.